them both ways. All right, I'm going to. All right, so we are here for the audiobook experience. Mary Catherine Jones, who I've adored over the years, is an owner and executive producer at the Audiobook Experience, an award-winning boutique audiobook recording and production studio. She delights in working with authors in her Vermont studio, as well as partner studio across the country to bring their stories into the world, either using their voices or finding the perfect narrator for the audiobook. So without further ado, I am going to turn the mic over to Miss Catherine.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here. The women in publishing community is one of my favorite places to hang out, and I want to make a special, I guess, announcement or whatever. I want you to know that I think of you all as part of my family. And so if there are questions that we don't get answered at the end of today's session, or if you're watching this on the replay, contact me, shoot me an email, anything that I can answer, I'm going to answer because at the end of the day, whether you work with me, with somebody else, or you're doing it yourself, I want you to get your audiobook out into the world. So that is our goal today. We're going to start working towards that. We're going to talk about, and some of you who have been to previous presentations, this is going to be some familiarizing yourself with it, but we're going to talk about the audiobook market as a whole and why you might be thinking about getting into it. But we'll, of course, cover different narration options to create your audiobook, production pathways, your manuscript prepped, your recording day prep for your own voice, if you're going to narrate your own, and we'll definitely be getting into the weeds on that one, as well as some sales and distribution strategies. So, over the past 11 years, we've looked at double-digit growth in the audiobook market. What started as $426 million is now $2.25 billion. And that was the 2024 statistics. The 2025 statistics, which are expected to be at least on par with that, will be released sometime in June. So you'll see an updated slide for that. This market is expected to continue growing over the next, 10 to 20 years at this same pace. So this is a good time to get into the market. Over 53% of Americans have consumed an audiobook at least once. Most of them have come in and listened multiple times. As you can see from this slide, the vast majority of the users are on the younger end of the spectrum, and that is good news for audiobook producers and recorders because that's a demographic that's going to continue to consume this product in this way as they age. So they've already adapted to this, and they're going to be looking for this kind of content as they go through their learning journeys. The fastest growing genres in audiobooks are history and biographies, particularly memoirs, and we'll talk a lot about narrating your own memoir, as well as religious and faith-based and some romance. So there we go. By the end of the year 2030, $35 billion is what this industry is expected to be bringing in. Audiobooks really can be called the new reading. To give a little bit more perspective on the stats before we move on, currently the audiobook market is anywhere from 15 to 18% of the book market. And I'm looking at US stats for this. And that is projected to grow by 2030 to between 23 and 25% of the book market overall. When people decide how they want to consume their content, whether it's print book, ebook, or audiobook, and often if it's not in the format that they're looking for, then they might move on to the next thing that they want to listen to or read or whatever. So having your book available in all of these forms, I think, is very important. So let's get into brass tacks for recording an audiobook. The decisions that you're going to need to make as an author or rights holder is who's going to narrate it, how are you going to record it. There's the editing and mastering, which is a lot. Then once it's finished, how are you going to distribute it? Where's that going to live? And most importantly, how are you going to sell it? So hopefully we'll get a chance to get through all of these things. It's a tight timeline. Um, I was talking to Kay before the room opened up, and really for me, I think you can distill this into when you're creating your audiobook, you're either investing a lot of time, you're investing a not insignificant amount of money. It's very difficult unless you are a professional audiobook producer to do it in a short amount of time and for not very much money because it takes a lot to do. But we'll talk through the different ways to do it, including I really want to get deeper into ways that you can do it yourself. I just really want to stress that when you're doing it yourself, please plan to take a lot of time because there's all these different components, each one of which has its own learning curve. But let's start with selecting a narrator. Your choices are using the author as a narrator. This is particularly good for memoir and thought leadership, hiring professional VO talent for fiction, for narrative nonfiction, that kind of thing, as well as memoir, if for whatever reason the author is not inclined to do it. And we'll talk very briefly about artificial intelligence. Um, so when thinking about narrating with AI, I'm not a fan of AI for a gazillion reasons. I'm very much about the human connection, and the voice literally is a way that we connect through vibration with other humans. That said, if otherwise one would not create an audiobook, AI is something to look at. Um, it's very good for bringing large numbers of audiobooks into the world from a backlist where it would otherwise be cost prohibitive. Certainly for textbooks, magazines, that kind of thing. I think we're all used to now hearing a, fairly adequate AI voice to be able to read those things to us, including on our computers. Um, the end customer experience is it's okay. It's not great. And sometimes it can be a little bit uncanny valley. Um, where I really, really would suggest that you not even consider AI are the following things. Not for memoir. Memoir is the human story. It needs to be told by a human voice, ideally the authors, if that is something that they're equipped to do. And if not, then a professional narrator. Please don't use AI for memoir narration. If you have a travel log and you are going and your book talks about different countries and all of that, or if it's a science fiction or fantasy, you're going to spend so much time in the back end trying to program the pronunciations of these places that you're going to really, it probably time-wise and maybe even cost-wise might have been cheaper just to hire a human in the first place because it can take a lot of time. So I would not do that for those genres. Um, you can also hire a professional narrator. Like I said, really good for fiction and science fiction, children's books, anything that requires a particular dramatic edge. Hiring a professional narrator is good. And inside note here, this picture here is Charlotte Shue. She is a member of the WIP family, and she's also a professional narrator. So if you're looking to hire your narrator and doing that yourself, she is somebody who is at your fingertips. Um, if you're not, if you don't find her, or if you need a male narrator or somebody who's not in the WIP community, other resources include the ACX Marketplace. ACX is the Audiobook Creators Exchange. It's the back end of basically Audible and Amazon, just like KDP is for Kindle. And on the ACX Exchange, you can see different narrators. You can see their pricing. Some narrators may even offer to do a royalty share project, which means that you don't pay for their services until your audiobook sells and they get a percentage of your royalties. The concern that I would have as a rights holder with that is a couple of things. One is this is only available if you are using Audible exclusive for your distribution. That means you are not going to be in the library market. You're not going to be on Spotify. You are limited to the Audible universe. Also, in my experience, the narrators who offer up their talents as part of a royalty share are doing it because they're trying to get experience. They're trying to, kind of beef up their list, and so they're learning on the job. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you can find some excellent narrators, and you can also find some disasters. So, just caveat emptor on that. You can also look at more professional casting sites. A place like Bodalgo is one where, as a rights holder, you can go onto that site for free and put in your queries, and different people will audition. They tend to be more experienced narrators. They also command a higher price. Um, and even so, I don't use Bodalgo anymore. I have found, though, that when I have done that, the kinds of narrators that I get really kind of vary across the board as far as when they send in their auditions. I'm like, ooh, where are you recording? It doesn't sound like a professional booth. So just again, listen, make sure it sounds professional. Um, the Fiverr and TaskRabbit is there because I know some people have done this. It's in red because wow, good luck. Like I hope that that works out for you. I would not do that. Certainly a professional casting agency would be another way to go, or an audiobook producer or production company. Okay, when you are recording your audiobook, no, let me step back. When you hire a professional narrator to do your audiobook, what you are hiring them to do is to narrate, to edit, to master, and to deliver back to you, unless you come up with an alternate arrangement, the fully finished audiobook files that are ready to upload to the audiobook platforms that you're going to be working with, which is why definitely you want to work with somebody who has previous experience, because there's a lot of hoops and dots and T's and I's and all that kind of stuff that you got to cross to make everything come through cleanly. But when you hire a narrator, then that is your part is kind of done until the files are finished and you're doing some proofing and communicating with your narrator at that point. Um, when you are thinking about recording your own audiobook using your voice, then your choices are either a professional studio or a studio that maybe you create out of your home environment somehow. What you need, whether you're in a professional studio or your home studio, there's some basic equipment. You need a quiet, sound-treated room. It does not have to be, and probably never will be, completely soundproof, but it's got to be very dampened. Um, a a closet with a lot of clothes in an interior portion of your house can often be a good place to start. You need a good quality microphone. You do not I would caution you against using a USB microphone, although there are some out there that will work. What I have found is when you are working with a USB mic, or, like a podcast mic, if you're familiar with podcasting, is they're pre-treated by using different amplifiers within the microphone itself, which can end up really wreaking havoc when you're going through the mastering process. So you've got to make sure you turn off any kind of internal preamps or sound. You want your dry voice without any effects on it going into the track when you're doing an audiobook, because after the recording, there's a whole lot of post-production. So you don't want those helpful things present in your mic. You need a pair of headphones because you're going to need to listen to yourself again and again and again while you're editing. Definitely need a computer. I prefer Macs when I'm recording myself versus a PC because they are quieter and their fans don't tend to turn on as often. So if you're using a laptop PC and you notice, oh, my fan has just turned on while you're recording, guess what? You're done recording until the fan turns off, because that sound will absolutely be in your audio files. You need a digital audio workstation, a DAW. When you are doing this yourself, unless you are planning to start a new career doing sound mixing, you can use a free program called Audacity. I recommend that. A lot of professional voice talent use that. It is perfectly adequate to the task. And or also remote recording platforms Some people have attempted to record their audiobooks basically on a podcast platform. I think that that can end up being a lot more work than you realize up front. Again, because a lot of these podcast recording platforms are being helpful by putting in all of these effects, which end up being disastrous when you're doing your post production. So, when you are recording your audiobook yourself, the first step is to prepare your space. Like I said, a walk-in closet is good. Here's a picture of a sort of semi-booth that you could, construct. I would be concerned about lighting. You'd want to have that in there. But rugs are wonderful. In my audio booth, I actually have a quilt that I put on tabs that I close in front of the door, so I keep those sound reflections from coming back into the microphone. Make sure that you silence your phone. Make sure that I don't know if you know the local train schedule or when jets fly overhead, try to time your recording around that. I found when I was recording myself, and I still am, oh, that's right, it's the end of school and the buses are going to be coming. So I think I'll just take a little 15-minute break. When you're recording, make sure you have water nearby. We'll go into much more detail at the end of this presentation on how you can really prep your voice for getting into the booth. Um, again, you want to avoid reflective surfaces. So what that means, and don't ever record outdoors, my heavens, or even with windows open, you would be amazed at what comes in through the track, and you don't want little crickets chirping and the wind blowing when on your audiobook track. Um, by reflective surfaces, when you are preparing and when you're reading your manuscript, you are not reading your book. You are not taking your physical book in and turning the pages. More likely than not, you're going to have a PDF of your book and you're going to have it on your iPad or some sort of e-reader so that you can very silently scroll through the pages and keep that noise to a minimum. Um, However, you might be very tempted to have the iPad or reading off your computer screen. Like just like right now, I'm talking to you and I'm looking at my computer. This would be a disaster if this is how I'm trying to also record my audiobook because my voice is bouncing straight off that flat surface of the screen and going right back into the microphone, and it's going to cause a very boxy, booming sound, which is why I really, really recommend you do not read off your computer screen. A tablet is fine if you have like a music stand or something like that so that you can tilt it so it's not perpendicular, but it's at more of an angle so you're talking over the text into the microphone. That will help reduce that boxiness. Here's another picture of home studio. The great thing about a home studio is that it is very, very convenient. It's flexible. Um, you do have the possibility for somebody to dial in and direct if you've got a setup that will allow that. Um, it's a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. And that's just getting ready and the recording bit. And we'll talk a little bit more about the hours required and all of that. Um, Once you have finished the recording, we go into something called mastering. So we'll actually when you first finish the recording, then you go back and you listen through and you do a proof, just like you would a manuscript, and you hear all the that mistake and this mistake and oh my God, how many mistakes, and that's normal. So you have to flag them, you have to identify them, then you go back in and you record the corrections to those. After you've finished recording all the corrections, you're still going to hear like a deep breath in some place or a gasp, or maybe you hit the mic, or you did some edits, but they're a little like you've got to close the gap or put in a little bit more space. So you go through that, and that's your first editing pass. Then when everything is ready, then you go through mastering. And what the mastering does is you go through like an EQ pass so that you're basically boosting the beautiful tones in your voice, and they're going to differ depending on person to person. The male voice usually has a much boomier low end, and so we're going to want to amplify that without it becoming overpowering. We wouldn't really want to boost the low end in most female voices because that can kind of sound unnatural, but you also don't want it to strip out all of the bass so it sounds really high. So you go through that EQ phase. And then we're basically increasing the amplitude of the waves and then squishing it back down so that the audio waves are nice and fat and produce a full sound in the ears. It ends up changing the sound a little bit, which is why you have to have a very quiet noise floor going in. And by noise floor, that means a very quiet recording space. Because if you have a loud room and you're trying to strip that out, you could end up destroying a lot of the quality of your recording. So, how much time does this take when you're doing it on your own? This is how much time it takes for professionals, for people who do this day in and day out. You're going to have your initial read through and prep, and that's however much time that is. Um, I would I would bank on between 2 and 3 recording hours to get to your finished hour. Okay. Then you've got your initial proofing pass. And so that's going to end up being depending on how you record. And I know we're getting into the weeds here. If you record in such a way that all of your mistakes are in the recording as you go, which is how most people who aren't, familiar with recording techniques do it, then it's going to take, it could take 2 or 3 hours to go through your initial proof. If you record using a method called punch and roll, when you're basically doing your gross proofing as you're recording, then your overall proof run is going to be more like 1.5 hours per finished hour. Then you're going to insert your pickups. That's going to be a few hours, maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on how many pickups you have. And then there's the final, like the real editing, the nitty gritty, getting all that in there. And that's going to be about 2.5 hours per finished hour. And then the mastering and the flitting, the file splitting and the naming so that you have them in the chapter format. And then, of course, the final proof. So the math for that I am putting into my estimates when I'm putting all that together and thinking, okay, how much time is it going to take? I'm going to guess it's going to basically take me between 6 and 7 person hours to get to a finished hour. Um, if you are learning each piece of this and you're doing this on your own, I would at least triple it. But it can be done. And I'm not being facetious when I say this. I started my business about 20 years ago, and it took me 3 months before I even was brave enough to get the microphone out of the box. I was pretty clear that I could do the speaking. I did not know how to do audio editing. And just like we've all had to teach ourselves things over the years, I spent a lot of time, and now I'm pretty good. But so don't let that be too daunting for you. Just know that if you want your audiobook to be available September 1, it's probably not going to happen. Okay. When you're working with a professional studio, all of that stuff, that's their job. You don't have to worry about anything except going in and sitting in front of the mic, and they'll tell you where to be, and they'll tell you when you made a mistake, and they'll just record you, and they'll do all the things we just talked about. It is usually, well, if you're working with a professional studio, it will be higher quality than doing a home recording. And that, again, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You can get a very good audiobook from most home studios. But you can also get some that are like, okay, it kind of sounds a little DIY. It'll pass specs, but you just have to know that there is a difference in that quality. Um, and speaking of that, we were talking about can I have an audiobook by September? Um, Even if you are ready and you call up your favorite producer tomorrow and say, I want my audiobook by September and I want to narrate it myself, depending on where you are and who you're talking to, that still might not be possible. Many professional studios, just like production houses, and publishing houses, they have a season, they book several months in advance. So if you are thinking about having an audiobook be part of your publishing platform and you want to release it at the same time as your printed book, earlier is much better than later to get on the production schedule. So please do plan ahead. Um, I won't go through everything that's on the slide here, but what I will say is when your audiobook is finished, you've done it all yourself. You've done the mixing, the mastering, and it's amazing. And you're ready, and you're like, okay, my audiobook goes on sale tomorrow. Not so fast. You upload it to the platform, and the platform itself is going to take 10 days to 2 weeks before it actually allows that title to be on the site. It's because they have their own internal metrics that they have to make sure that the files pass and all that kind of thing. So when you're, again, backdating your production timeline to meet your release date, definitely keep that in mind. Okay, so now we're going to adapt our print books for audio. This is particularly something that's geared towards nonfiction, somewhat with memoir. It's rarely an issue with fiction, which is mostly text. Um, Often in nonfiction thought leadership, there might be some charts or graphs or other visual elements or design elements that are in the print book that just aren't going to translate well to audio. And there are ways that you can address this up front. Ideally, the graphics are more supplemental than critical. If they're more illustrations but you can still get through the main concepts without looking at the graphics, then I recommend having something at the beginning and or end of the audiobook saying the printed version of this book contains some wonderful illustrations and charts and graphs that help illustrate the concepts that I am presenting. They are available to audiobook listeners on my website. Please visit. You can also create a PDF of those illustrations, and that can be an added bonus for your audiobook listeners. If the image is really critical to explain the concept or thought, then before you record, before you go into a studio or your own studio, basically create your own audio description of whatever that is. It might be picture a pyramid, and at the bottom of this pyramid are whatever the foundational concepts are. And built upon this pyramid, the middle third is whatever those concepts are. And then at the peak, the top point of the pyramid, built on all of these other concepts, is your main concept. But think about what that text is. You're going to find it can be you'll be feeling very flustered if you're in a recording studio and the clock is ticking and all that kind of stuff. You don't want to feel that kind of pressure. So just be prepared for it in advance. So like I said, just you can use visual elements and describe them. If you are working with a narrator, do the same thing. Have a conversation with your narrator in advance of the recording and say, maybe you can even ask them, how would you suggest that we adapt this for audio? Or you can say, this is how I'm planning to address this. What do you think? Make sure you're very, very clear when you're working with a narrator what you want them to do and when you want them to do it. Make sure you have page numbers, make sure it's very, very clearly marked in the text. And also on the post-production side, when you get your finished files, double check. Make sure that anytime you're making changes or exceptions to what's already printed, you're introducing more room for error. So just make sure that you're looking or listening to that more carefully at the end. Here's an example of different ways that you can address these images. There's the example of the simple pyramid graphic. So with the more complex graphic, I'm not going to read this, but these slides are available to you. And it basically describes the graphic. So that's good. And another thing I didn't mention is lists. Lists can get really, really boring to the listener. So if you have more than, I would say, 5 to 7 items, think about, can you condense this? So, in this example, there's literally, I think that it was 2 pages of like, here's a list of all the foods that you should eat more often for a healthy diet. And, no, you don't want that. And instead, I think we had the author narrator listed the top 3 or 4 and said, and there's another, there's a more comprehensive list that's available as a download on my website. Remember, every time you're driving someone to your website, you have the opportunity to get their email address and make them part of your mailing list. Then, once your audiobook is done, you figure out, okay, so what are my distribution options? Obviously, Amazon Audible is critical. I think that they're responsible for about 55 to 60% of audiobook sales. So unless you're really determined not to use them, they will most likely be part of your publishing portfolio. An up and coming player is Spotify, and they're really kind of pushing the envelope as far as what they're able to introduce to potential audiobook listeners. They are expanding the market. I can speak from experience just in my own household. My husband is not an audiobook listener, except now he is because he had the Spotify premium account. And oh, all of a sudden he gets 15 hours of an audiobook. Well, I guess I can give it a try. And now he's hooked. So there you go. Um, when you're publishing, if you go exclusive through Audible, you get some marketing bells and whistles. That's great, but you are cut out from Spotify, from the audiobook market within the library market, which I think for many, particularly fiction, you really need to be in that market. So those are different things that you need to think about. What I recommend to the authors I work with, 9 times out of 10, is to go through a wider distribution platform like Authors Republic. Authors Republic distributes to, I think it's 50 or 60 different channels, including Audible and Spotify and the library market and all of that. And so that way it's a one-stop place to reach all of your different potential customers. Um, Ways to use your audiobook assets is you might want to upload your audiobook to YouTube. Some of you who read Jade Friedman's newsletter might have already read about this, but there's some, there appears to be some traction by loading up the entire audiobook onto YouTube, which is, one of the largest marketing channels on the planet. And people go in, they get a taste of what you're about, and that might end up driving sales for you. You can create an audio teaser from your book, and you can link that to a promo, for more of this, click here, buy the book. You can create custom intros for speaking venues, depending on the platform that you're using. You can also serialize your audiobook on Substack. I've now worked with 2 authors who are doing that. Results TBA, but I think that's a very interesting thing. So hang on a second. Okay, I'm going to go back because we are going to, this is a first break for questions, and then we're going to go into the weeds of preparing your voice for recording. So, Kay, if you're there and can help share questions, that would be awesome.
Okay, the first question is if you put out a book with AI just to get it out, no time, no money for now, and then you are able to do it with a human down the road, does it hurt that you had it with the AI first?
I think that there's going to be a lot of different ways to look at that question. So one is if you've got your print book and then you do an AI version of it, depending on the quality of the AI, that could it could affect your brand as an author. Um, I believe that you would have to, and some platforms will not accept AI, so you have to make sure that you're working with a platform that will accept AI. What I wonder, and I don't know the answer to, is if you take it down and then you reintroduce it, it might have to be under a different ISBN for the audiobook, which means that you would lose, it would be like starting from zero. So let's say that you've got some traction with the AI version, but now you want to do a new version. It might end up being as if you just published it, so it wouldn't have that same ranking within the different charts. So that's just something I would be thinking about.
Okay. If you put out a book with, oh, wait, I answered that one. Um, I'm publishing my memoir in September. I haven't started the process for the audiobook yet. Assuming I won't have the audiobook ready by the September release date, what are the pros and cons of releasing the audiobook with a 2 to 3 month of the publication
For
date.
publication, sure. So what I always say is if money is no object, and that's rarely the case, but if you come at this and you're like, I have a big robust budget and I want to do all the things all the time, the ideal time to release your audiobook is at the same time as your print and ebook because it will benefit from the marketing launch that presumably you are doing to launch that product. So that's the that's the gold standard. If you are going to publish your audiobook subsequent to that, then definitely think about a separate marketing plan for the audio. It might be that, if I don't know, if it's a book about horses or something, and so you think, so now it's time to release the audiobook, maybe you wait until National Horse Month or whatever, something that you can piggyback on that will generate interest in that title as a standalone, and of course, include the other formats of your book. But I would I would caution against just quietly adding it to the different formats available, although that's certainly an option. You do have this opportunity to basically re-promote your book, in all of its different formats because you are coming out with the audio version.
Okay. Can you tell us what the royalty ratio how it works maybe for the audiobooks? If the audiobooks is $10, how much does the author get?
Um, okay, this is so far outside of my area, but I do know a little bit, and the answer is not very much. Um, so it depends again on the platform that you're working with and whether you're going exclusive and whether you're going wide and all of that. What I can tell you is that royalties are calculated off of the net price, whether that's the physical book or the ebook or whatever. For the most part, within the audiobook realm, most authors are getting anywhere from 70 up to 85% of the net price, so whatever that book is sold for, um, back into their pocket. So in that case, if the book is $10, if it retails for 10, then and it's wholesales basically for at least five, it might even be less than that, then you'd be getting, between 75 and 85% of the $5, presuming that it was purchased wholesale at 50%. You will see on different platforms, and this is, I mean, like we need like a 3-week retreat to even understand a lot of the numbers behind it, at least I would. But you'll see on some platforms like Audible, oh, the book is now $2.99. Okay, so guess what? You're now getting 85% or 75% of $2.99. How they make those determinations, I have no idea. What I can say, though, as maddening as that can be, my understanding is that those price points are driven by a combination of opt-in from the rights holder saying, yes, I want to be part of these special promo opportunities, and or Audible saying, you know what? We think that it's better to sell 3 books at $2.99 than no books at $10.99. So that's, I know, a not very satisfactory way of answering that question, but it's a very broad overview, and I hope that helps.
Yes, I was a little shocked the first audiobook I did that they chose the price of the book, not me. That kind of set me off a little bit, but you get used to it, I suppose. You do have a handful of other questions, but they're more about how do you record or voice fatigue or how do you warm yourself up
Let's
or
do it. Let's
or
go. I got a whole
or
other thing.
the one other thing is where you look for voice actors. It seems to be another common question where you go to find people.
So I addressed that a little bit in the earlier slide. So basically, you can Google voice talent. You can go to voices.com, I think is still out there. Badalgo is another site. These are all what we call pay to play as far as the voice talent is concerned in order to be listed there. And And some of them are pros and some of them started the day after yesterday. So um, it's hard to know when you're going through those sites. All right, let's
All
go
right.
to recording your audiobook. All right, this is when you are going to be the voice, whether you're doing this at home or whether you're going into a studio. These are tips and tricks that I send to everybody that I work with. So the week of recording, it's going to be important that you think about drinking as much as humanly possible. All right. Your vocal cords need moisture in order to operate effectively. So do them and yourself a favor and drink, 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 drink. Stay away from too much alcohol. I'm not going to say don't drink any alcohol at all, but water is your best friend. You want to stay away from dairy when you're eating things. So fruits and crackers and salads and all of that the week of recording are wonderful to eat, but stay away from anything with dairy in it, whether it's cheese or yogurt or butter is actually fine. That's silly to be in the graphic. But stay away from the dairy products because what happens when you eat dairy is that it increases the mucus production inside your mouth, and that translates into noisy mouth clicks when you're recording. When you're recording, your microphone is right there and it is picking up everything. And there have been times when I have recorded somebody who has, just come from Milkshake Central, and it sounds like they have a mouthful of Rice Krispies, and it's not a good sound. And it can be difficult to mitigate. You can do a little bit of that in post-production, but often we have to actually stop recording and just give the mouth time to settle. So again, stay away from dairy for about the full week before recording. Um, like I said, fruits and salads, non-dairy is great. And don't eat or drink dairy. There we go. Now it's recording day. What can you do for recording day? Once again, hydrate. It's like a broken record over here. A green apple, believe it or not, can actually help take away mouth noise. Not completely, but it can do a good job. So I will sometimes have green apples on hand and ready to slice up in my studio. There's something about the pectin in the green apple skin that helps to mitigate that mouth noise. Red apple, doesn't matter. Green apple can be a really, really effective tool. So it's nice to have that around. If you are recording yourself and you're listening back and you're hearing that, go get yourself some more water and another green apple. This is really important. When you are recording, before you get into the booth, think about what you're wearing. I already talked a little bit about smartwatches, make sure they're silenced. If you wear earrings, make sure that they are, studs or ones that don't have lots of little bits that are going to jangle when you are recording. Soft cotton clothes, jeans, layers, sweater, as long as it's, made of cotton or wool, those are all great. Do not wear what I would call loud fabrics. And I'm not talking about bold prints. I'm talking about highly pressed shirts. I'm talking about like a windbreaker. Anything like that means that whenever you move, and you will move while you're in the booth, that sound of your body moving and brushing up against each other, it's going to be in your recording, and you're going to have to redo it, and it's going to drive you absolutely nuts. Um, I've in past presentations, I've told the story of how my husband has more than once come home when I'm recording, and he'll walk by the studio and look in, and on the guest chair is a man's dress shirt. Because guess what? He didn't read the directions, and he came and said we had to make him take off the shirt to record. But in a first for me, I worked with a woman who had been out. She was so excited to be in Vermont, and she's been out for a hike, and she came in and she was wearing wind pants. And oh my gosh. So we had to stop recording, and she ended up putting on a pair of my yoga pants because It's that much of a thing. So really think about what you're wearing. And like I said, don't wear the noisy fabrics. Now we're going to talk a little bit about vocal warm-ups. I won't I won't do them for you. Well, I guess I can do a few of them for you, but the reason that I'm sharing them with you is because they are, in my opinion, a critical piece of your recording, repertoire. Your voice is different first thing in the morning than it is at the end of the day. And we're not talking about vocal fatigue here. We're really talking about the voice being warmed up. I think that my voice is probably 2 notes lower in the morning than it is by the end of the day. And so if I'm recording and, like, let's say I stop in the middle of a chapter and then I come back to it the next morning, it might sound something like, and then I went to the store, and then the next morning where I found a bag of groceries. I mean, it can be jarring. So by doing these vocal warm-ups, you actually get your voice at a pretty steady, consistent space. So let's talk a little bit about my favorites. And again, I'm happy to share these with you guys afterwards. Stretches, this just includes rubbing your jaw, stretching out, getting all that looseness out. Spend about a minute doing that, yawning. Ah, really getting the back of your throat is good. I'm doing these very briefly for now. Lip buzzes is one of my favorites, okay? And by that, I mean motorboats, whatever you want to call them. They are fantastic if you have a little bit of post-nasal drip, so you kind of feel a little bit of frog in the back of your throat. Doing these, especially if you do them on scales, can clear up so much of that little bit of residue phlegm at the back of your throat. So definitely, definitely incorporate lip buzzes. The hyoid bone is the smallest bone in the body, I believe. Maybe there's a smaller one in the ear, but it is the only free-floating bone in the body. It's only attached by muscle or ligament, and it's basically in your Adam's apple. If you feel that your voice is getting fatigued, massage this back and forth, and it can really reduce vocal tension. Also, when you're talking about vocal fatigue, one way to avoid vocal fatigue is to build up vocal stamina. There was one author that I worked with who was very concerned because she's a public speaker. And she said, I know that my voice gives out after 45 minutes. I'm just done. And she said, so I'm very worried about coming to Vermont and working with you because, you schedule 4 to 6 hours a day, and I'm afraid I'll be done after 45 minutes. And so we had long conversations about this, and I basically sent her a link to the vocal exercises that I recommend by Heather Lyle. She has an album called Vocal Yoga, and she has exercises in there, and she's a professional vocal coach, which I am not. But she has exercises in there that help promote vocal stamina. And so this author did those exercises. I think it was 4 months between the time we talked and the time she came here. And she said, these exercises have changed my life. This is not my story. They were not my exercises. I just sent her a link, but she did the exercises, and for her, they made a huge difference. So there are resources out there to help with things like vocal fatigue. But now we're going to talk about a super secret tool that I use in my booth. And that is, stand by, drum roll. It's a cork. Oh, hang on. I got to go back. I want to go back to my previous slide. Let me go back to the cork. So hang on a second. All right. So the reason that the cork is a thing, I'm going to do a very, very short demonstration, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Just reading from the back of a book here. Next Year's Best Years is a compelling new resource you can turn to time and again to help you begin or move to the next level of the emotional and practical aspects of this inevitable, though often poorly understood, life transition. Now, next year's best years is a compelling new resource you can turn to time and again to help you begin or move to the next level of the emotional and practical aspects of this inevitable Next Year's Best Years is a compelling new resource you can turn to time and again to help you begin or move to the next level of the. So, what you hear there is you hear my voice placed further forward in the mouth. I have warmed up my embouchure by using the cork. And by doing this, it's increasing my diction and the level of articulation. And that results in capturing the ear of the listener. The listener doesn't know why, but they're like, oh, I hear something. It's very clear. I use this at the beginning, usually of after we've taken a break from recording, get back in, do this a little bit, unless it's mid paragraph or mid chapter, in which case you don't want to do it like in the middle of something because it is a pretty stark difference. This effect fades after about 3 or 4 paragraphs, but it's really great to kind of kickstart the recording. Okay, so we've already done this, the super secret VO tool. Are we going? Yes, the cork. We've done that. Let's get out of that. Come on. When you are recording, you want to be about 6 to 8 inches from the mic. So this is the hook 'em horns. That's about your mouth, the mic, about right there. When you're recording, it is better to go, well, definitely you don't want to go too fast. So be thinking about that. And it is far better to pause and have longer pauses between sentences and paragraphs, which you will then edit out. But it's far easier to edit out too much space than it is to try to insert space where you don't have it and you need it. Try to avoid gasping breaths because they're really hard and tedious to edit out. When you're reading, just like the gentleman here is, smile. The ear can hear the smile. It brings more energy into the read. And that energy is much more important than the speed and the rate at which you read. And there we are. We're at the end and another bit of questions. We've got a couple of minutes. I hope I answered the ones that were in there about the delivery and performance.
Excellent. Yes, gosh, I'm having flashbacks and I'm about to record my next book starting in a couple weeks. So, and I encourage people in the shower, go because I did music for a long time. Go take a good heated shower and
That
do the
definitely
warm-ups
loses.
while you're in the shower and do the lip rolls. Everything you said, I'm like, yep, do those. Yep, do those. I've never done the cork. I might have to go get a cork. Okay. A lot of these questions are actually just where do you recommend I look for a VO person for this genre of book? Um, do you mentioned it once before. Can you give what you recommend people to look for like if it's a children's book or an anthology or whatever it might be where you recommend them go to look for people?
So again, what you want to do is you want to find a voice talent aggregator or work with a producer. But Bidalgo is one. Other casting agencies like Voices 123 or voices.com. I don't remember which one is still active because I don't use them. ACX, again, if you want to be limited to the Amazon universe, you can go through ACX. And what you're going to want is you're going to want to say in your audition what you are auditioning for. Professional narrators will often be able to cover a multitude of genres. It's more important that you think about the vocal qualities that you want than you think then about the actual genre. Um, a children's saying I need a children's book narrator doesn't help anybody. If you need to have a female with a Southern accent, preferably from Tennessee, between 20 and 30 years of age, um, with other characters that range, from accents from, from French to pirate speak or something like that. You want to have that in your descriptor. You don't want to hire a narrator as the main narrator, and then say, oh, yes, and I also need you to be speaking authentic Creole. You want to have all of that in the specs that you're putting out there for audition so that you get the right person. I always insist on a custom audition. If you take nothing else away from this presentation, if you are doing your own, if you're looking for the narrator yourself, do not ever hire someone based on just their demo tape. Always ask for a custom audition. It is absolutely fine to select it, somewhere between 300 and 400 words from your work, ideally with dialogue, because that's going to really help them help you hear how they handle dialogue, which is more difficult than straight narration, and have them do a custom audition. And when you're listening for that, I'm listening as much as, if not more than the performance. I'm listening for, are they in a professional space? Are they professional narrators, or did they decide yesterday that they're going to do this, and how hard can it be? Because you can hear that. If you hear the room before you hear their voice, then I would move on.
All right, there are two more questions I think are good ones. And then do you have some place where for the questions I didn't get answered, that some people can go to reach out to you? Do you have like contact information that
Absolutely.
we can have up while we ask these last two? Here
So
we go.
there's me a little bit, and there we go, the audiobookexperience.com, and go on with those questions.
Okay, one of them I think is a great one is what about doing voices for different characters? Can you do it without doing the actual voices? What percentage of fiction doesn't do voices at all?
Well, again, working with a professional narrator, you're going to be able to have different inflections that are going to be able to identify the different characters. It doesn't have to be full on cartoon, over the top, well, partner, I guess I'm from the South. It can be something as subtle as, this is the main narrator voice. And then when a male character comes in, perhaps his cadence is just a little slower, or his voice is a little bit lower, or perhaps it's a little bit higher when it's somebody who's younger. And that's not my genre. I'm all nonfiction if I narrate. But those are the things that you want to listen for. It doesn't have to be over the top character delineation. Um, so I hope that that answers your question. I did want to say, if you are doing your own narration, particularly if it's memoir or thought leadership, just those subtle changes and working with a vocal coach or with a director can really help you make sure that the listener understands that it's two different voices. You may want to add dialogue tags, he said, she said, that kind of thing. Um, and think about these different characters and how you might approach them.
This person had a couple questions, but I think the more relevant one from, in my opinion, is it legit for a woman to narrate a male POV story? Do I have to lower my voice?
Oh my gosh, if you lower your voice and you're trying basically to sound like a man, that would be the worst thing in the whole world. Narrate it with your voice. Narrate the man's point of view as a woman. That's it. Easy. We have all listened to stories that are, think of Winnie the Pooh. Okay? I mean, that's those the cast of characters in Winnie the Pooh is predominantly male. I guarantee you that most of us heard those stories from a female voice, and did not try to lower their voice to be the overall male voice. No, you want to have, if you are the predominant narrator, it doesn't matter if it's a male POV. That said, that would be something I would want to sort of feel out a little bit. Like, is there a reason that it would be a female versus a male? If it's a male POV, I would instinctively go to a male, but I wouldn't have a female trying to imitate a male.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Mary Catherine. This was wonderful and very informative for those of you who are ready to venture into the audiobook world. Um, I hope you reach out to Mary Catherine if you have any additional questions. Let's give some likes and loves to this wonderful presentation. And I guess we will see you at the next webinar. Thank you so much, Mary Catherine. You all take care.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.